There are artists who make music, and then there are artists who become the music, who fold themselves so completely into every line, every chord change, that when the song plays, you are not hearing a performance. You are hearing a life. Alan Jackson is 35 #1 singles. He is 75 million records sold. He is the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Country Music that bears his name alone because no other name would have been right. He is Chattahoochee, and remember when and where were you when the world stopped turning? Songs that did not merely chart, but became the emotional architecture of an entire generation's memory. But behind that immortal catalog lies a story not glamorous, but breathtaking in what it cost. A boy from a Georgia toolshed house who drove to Nashville with nothing but a guitar and a wife who believed in him. A man who stood on stages around the world for decades while a disease was quietly, methodically taking the ground out from under his feet, and who kept standing anyway. And a daughter who watched all of it from the closest seat in the house her whole life long and still, did not fully understand what she had been witnessing, until the night 80,000 people came to say goodbye. The legend was always there. She was just too close to see it clearly. If Alan Jackson's voice has ever carried you through something you could not carry alone, if you have ever turned up the radio and let him sing the thing you could not say, hit like right now as tribute music to the greatest country singer who ever walked out of Newnan, Georgia. Because this is not the story of a country star. This is the story of what a country star is actually made of. When the spotlight goes dark and the disease moves in and the love endures anyway. And the moment a daughter finally said out loud what we had all long suspected. She had been watching him her entire life. 36 years of concerts, rehearsals, sound checks, tour buses, backstage corridors, and stadium crowds. 36 years of watching her father walk out under the lights and become something larger than the man who drove her to school, who sat at the kitchen table, who was simply Dad. For Maddie Denise Jackson, music smith, the stages were never magical. They were just Tuesday. The roar of the crowd was never breathtaking. It was background noise. The kind of background noise a child absorbs so completely that it stops registering as extraordinary, because extraordinary when it surrounds you from birth is simply what normal looks like. June 27, 2026 was different. The Nissan Stadium in Nashville held 80,000 people that night. 80,000. And every single one of them had come for the same reason: to stand in the presence of a man who had given them the words for their own lives, and to say thank you one final time before the curtain came down. The show was called Last Call, One More for the Road, the finale. The name alone carried the weight of everything it meant. Not a farewell tour, not a hiatus, a finale. One word, one door closing gently but permanently on one of the longest and most magnificent careers country music has ever produced. Maddie was there. She was always there. But this time, something inside her shifted. Something cracked open. She stood in that stadium, and she looked at those 80,000 faces. Strangers. Every one of them. People who had never met Alan Jackson. People who knew him only through the songs. And she saw, maybe for the very first time, what her father actually was to the world outside their family. She saw the magnitude of it. She felt the weight of it. And afterward, she sat down and she wrote the words that would confirm what millions of fans had suspected for years. That the man they had been watching had been giving them far more than they ever knew. That is where this story ends. But to understand what it means, you have to go back to where it began. Newnan, Georgia is not the kind of place that appears on maps of American ambition. It is a small city in Kuwait County about 40 miles southwest of Atlanta. Close enough to the city to know what the world looks like when it moves fast. Far enough away to understand that most lives move slowly, and that there is dignity in that slowness. It is a town of churches and front porches, and people who work with their hands because that is what their parents did, and their parents before them. And the work itself is a form of inheritance as real as any deed or dollar. Alan Eugene Jackson was born there on October 17, 1958. The fifth child, the youngest. His father, Joseph Eugene Jackson, was a mechanic, a quiet, steady man who worked with tools the way other men worked with words, communicating through what he built and fixed rather than through what he said. His mother, Ruth Music Jackson, held the household together with the particular kind of strength that working-class Southern mothers have always carried, invisible to outsiders, indispensable to everyone inside those four walls. The family was not poor in the way that makes headlines. They were poor in the way that is simply the texture of life for millions of American families, careful with every dollar, aware of every bill, building what they could with what they had. And what they had literally was a tool shed. The house where Alan Jackson grew up was built around his grandfather's old tool shed. Not beside it, not near it, around it. The shed became part of the structure, absorbed into the walls of the home, the way that the past in the American South is always absorbed into the present. Never quite erased, always there if you know where to look. Jackson would later immortalize that detail in a song because that is what he did with everything that mattered to him. He turned it into music so it would never be lost. That was the first lesson Newnan taught him. The things that shape you deserve to be remembered. And the way to remember them is to sing about them honestly, without decoration, without pretension, in plain American language that anyone who has ever worked with their hands will immediately recognize as true. He did not grow up in a musical family in any formal sense. There were no piano lessons, no school productions, no early encouragement from a music teacher who saw something in him. What there was instead was the radio. Country music floating through the house the way certain things float through working-class homes. Not as entertainment, exactly, but as atmosphere, as emotional weather. George Jones, Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, the voices of men who had also come from small places and hard circumstances, and had somehow found the words for all of it. Young Alan absorbed those voices the way he absorbed everything about Newnan. Without knowing he was doing it, without understanding yet what it was building inside him, he met Denise in high school. Denise Ann Jackson, born Denise Ann Oliphant, was a Newnan girl. Music, same as him. And from the moment they found each other in the corridors of Newnan High School, something locked into place that would not unlock for the rest of their lives, no matter what came between them in the years ahead. He was the quiet mechanic's son with a guitar and a voice that did things to people when they heard it. She was the girl who believed in him before he had given her any concrete reason to. That combination, his talent and her faith, would turn out to be the engine of everything that followed. They married on December 15, 1979. He was 21 years old. She was not much older, and they had almost nothing. No money, no industry connections, no plan more specific than the feeling that Nashville was where you went when music was what you were, and that if you went there together, something would find a way to happen. So they went, and in the going, in the pure, unhedged courage of two young people from Newnan, Georgia, loading up everything they owned and driving toward a city that broke more dreams than it built, the legend began. Nashville in the early 1980s was not kind to newcomers. It never had been. The city had a particular way of receiving young men with guitars and dreams, with polite indifference, mostly occasionally punctuated by outright rejection. And the ratio of talent that arrived to talent that survived was brutal enough to discourage anyone who was not built for the long wait. Alan and Denise Jackson arrived with almost nothing and spent years in that in-between space that no one talks about when they tell the story of a legend's rise. The space between leaving home and actually arriving anywhere where you are too far from what you were to go back and not yet close enough to what you want to touch it. Denise worked. She worked so that Alan could write and play and try. She took jobs that paid the bills while he took the meetings that paid nothing but kept the door open a crack. There is a version of Alan Jackson's story that begins with his first #1 single, or with his first Grammy, or with the night the Country Music Hall of Fame called his name. But the real story, the one that explains everything that came after, begins in those early Nashville years with Denise Jackson going to work every morning so that her husband's dream did not have to die for lack of rent money. That is not a footnote to his career. That is the foundation of it. The breakthrough, when it came, arrived through a door that Denise herself opened. She was working at the Delta Airlines counter at Nashville's airport when she recognized Glenn Campbell, one of the great figures of American country music, waiting in line. Another woman might have let the moment pass. Denise Jackson did not. She approached him, told him about her husband, told him what Alan could do, and asked if Glenn would be willing to listen.